Life had been pretty steady and comfortable over the last few years. I'd been married to Hannah for 6 of them. Even when things weren't perfect, I thought we were doing well. My job had a firm grip on my time and energy, driving me deeper into my career, while Hannah's busy social life occasionally got under my skin. But I told myself we had a rhythm that worked. We still made time for each other, like our Saturday night tradition. Sure, there were a few cracks in our relationship now and then, but they seemed insignificant and manageable, or so I believed. Then last weekend changed everything. Hannah seemed unusually excited about a party her employer was hosting for Jake. "It's nothing serious, just some work friends," she said, brushing off my hesitation. Her tone was dismissive, as if I were being ridiculous for questioning it. "You should come too. It'll be fun," she added, her voice light, though it felt hollow. I decided to go, telling myself it was about being supportive, but deep down, something didn't sit right. Lately, she'd been distant, always lost in her phone, smiling at the screen in a way that made my stomach churn. When I asked who she was talking to, her answers were vague, just Emma or it's work. At the party, she disappeared into the crowd almost instantly, as she always did, effortlessly flitting from one conversation to another. I stood there, nursing a beer, trying to push down the unease gnawing at me. But I couldn't shake it. Her behavior was off. Her eyes kept scanning the room, as if searching for someone. I told myself I was overreacting, but something urged me to follow her. I stepped outside into the cool night air, the backyard softly lit with fairy lights, and scanned the crowd for her. I first heard her laugh familiar, but unsettling, coming from the far corner of the yard. My heart dropped. There she was, standing with a man I didn't recognize. They were standing far too close. Her hand rested lightly on his chest, and his arm was casually draped around her waist. Their heads leaned in toward each other, sharing an intimacy that should have been mine. Then they kissed. A wave of disbelief and pain crashed over me. My mind screamed at me to look away, but I couldn't move. I stood frozen, watching as the life I thought I had crumbled before my eyes. The beer bottle slipped from my hand, hitting the ground with a dull thud. The sound startled Hannah. Her eyes met mine, wide with shock and panic. I felt nothing but hurt and fury. The guy next to her looked between us, confused, but I didn't wait for an explanation. I turned and walked away, the raw ache in my chest unbearable. She didn't come home that night. The next morning, when she finally walked through the door, she looked a mess, her makeup smeared, eyes red, cheeks flushed. "Jake, please let me explain," she said, but I couldn't bring myself to care about her excuses. I just stood there, letting her stammer on about Brandon from work. In that moment, I realized this wasn't a mistake or a weak moment. It was a choice, a series of choices she'd made repeatedly. Her betrayal wasn't just about the kiss. It was a betrayal of everything we'd built together. Asc. She finished her tearful confession. I knew what I had to do. I found myself packing a bag. "Jake, please," she begged, her voice trembling. I held up my hand to stop her. "I need time to think. Don't follow me." Her shoulders slumped as she stepped aside. I walked out the door, knowing nothing would ever be the same again. Sitting across from my oldest friend Ryan, I could see the shock on his face. "That's messed up, man," he muttered, shaking his head. We sat in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on us. Finally, Ryan spoke, his voice cautious. "I'm not sure what you're going to do." I stared ahead, my thoughts a storm. We'd been together for 7 years. Could it really end like this? Ryan didn't answer right away. He leaned back, studying me before saying, "It doesn't have to be the end." I shook my head, cutting him off. "A mistake is forgetting my birthday." "This wasn't a mistake, Ryan. This was a choice." Ryan nodded silently, not pushing further. He left, and I sat alone in the dimly lit living room, staring at the wedding photo on the mantel. Hannah's smile was frozen in time, her eyes filled with love. It felt like a cruel joke. I picked up the frame and turned it face down. Tomorrow, I'd figure out what came next. For now, I just had to get through the night. Sunday morning hit me like a freight train. The silence in the house was suffocating. I hadn't slept. My thoughts kept circling back to her and Brandon laughing and kissing as if I didn't exist. If Hannah thought I'd accept her sob story, she was wrong. I needed answers. In our shared workspace, I approached her laptop. Once ours, now mostly hers for work. I hesitated, but couldn't stop myself. As the screen lit up, I opened an email from just a few weeks ago. I can't stop thinking about last night. You're amazing. I'll figure out a way to see you soon. My stomach twisted as I scrolled through the messages, late-night meetings, hotel stays, and carefully crafted excuses. Her calendar was filled with fake work events, each detail arranged to cover their secret rendezvous. The anger that had been simmering inside me boiled over. I slammed the laptop shut and stormed over to her nightstand. In the drawer, I found her journal, a leather-bound diary. I opened it and scanned the pages filled with neat cursive writing. I feel so alive when I'm with Brandon, but I feel guilty. Jake doesn't deserve this. What's wrong with me? I threw the journal back down in anger. I had read it all, each betrayal, and lie laid out in cold, undeniable clarity. My phone buzzed with a message from Hannah. Jake, I can't take the silence. Can we talk? I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Finally, I typed back, not yet. By Monday, the storm inside me had only grown. When she texted again, asking to meet, I agreed. She showed up at my house at 6 on the dot. Her face was pale, her eyes tired, and her hesitant smile did little to reassure me. Jake, she began, her voice tentative. Sit down, I said coldly, cutting her off. She obeyed, nervously fidgeting with her hands. I placed her laptop and journal on the coffee table. What's this? I asked, my voice flat. Her face drained of color as her eyes darted between the two items. You made a mistake, she said. Her sobs grew louder, but I felt nothing. Just cold, empty numbness. I grabbed the journal and slammed it onto the table. You wrote this, didn't you? I feel alive when I'm with him. She reached for the journal, but I snatched it away. No, you don't get to run from this. You owe me the truth, Hannah. For the next 20 minutes, I laid out everything, every lie, every betrayal. Jake, please don't do this, she begged, her eyes filled with desperation. I'm sorry, Hannah, I said. I'm filing for divorce. It's done. She started to plead again, but I couldn't listen. You wrote this, didn't you? I feel alive when I'm with him. She reached for the journal once more, but I held it tight. You owe me the truth. By the end of my recounting, she was sobbing into her hands. Why? I demanded, my voice cracking. Why wasn't I enough for you? Through her tears, she whispered, I made a mistake, Jake. I know I did. I shook my head. You keep calling it a mistake, but this wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. A choice you made over and over again. Her sobs echoed my pain, but I felt nothing. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered, barely audible. You're standing up now, I said. And you'll deal with the consequences. Her eyes filled with desperation as she looked up at me. Jake, please don't do this, she begged. I shook my head. It's done, Hannah. I'm filing for divorce. Pack your things and leave. This isn't your home anymore. She begged for another hour, her words desperate and tearful. But my decision didn't waver. When she finally walked out the door, I felt lighter. Our life together was over, but I was still standing. For now, that was enough.